picture ancient Rome. We tend to imagine a world of total freedom, a place where men could openly love other men. We think of emperors and their boyfriends, a society free from the hang-ups that would define later centuries. But honestly, this vision of a gay paradise is mostly a fantasy. The reality was far more complicated and frankly dangerous. In Rome, who you loved was dictated by one brutal, unspoken rule. Were you the master, or were you the one being mastered? Your answer could be the difference between honor and social ruin. Because for the Romans, it wasn't about who you slept with, but how. Their very definition of manhood or virtus was on the line. To get Roman sexuality, you have to throw out our modern playbook. Words like homosexual and heterosexual didn't even exist in Latin. Instead, Roman society was built on a rigid ladder of power, and that ladder went all the way to the bedroom. The only thing that mattered in a sexual act was who was active and who was passive. A proper Roman man, a freeborn citizen, was always expected to be the active, penetrating partner. This was a demonstration of his virtues, his manliness, his courage, and his right to conquer. He could have sex with men and women, even while married, without anyone batting an eye, but only if he followed the rules. His partner had to be of a lower social status. We're talking slaves, ex-slaves, prostitutes or entertainers, people considered infames who didn't have the social or legal protections of a citizen. A man could sleep with his male slave, but he couldn't touch another citizen's son, and definitely not another freeborn man of his own rank. Taking the passive role was seen as giving up your masculinity. It was shameful, weak, and servile. A man who willingly did so was opening himself up to mockery, political attacks, and complete social destruction. If you couldn't even rule your own body, how could you possibly rule others? This is perfectly captured in the political dirt thrown at Julius Caesar. His enemies never got tired of spreading rumors that, as a young man, he'd been the passive partner in an affair with King Nicomedes of Bithynia. At his own victory parade, his soldiers reportedly chanted, "Caesar laid Gaul low, but Nicomedes laid Caesar low." The insult wasn't that he'd been with a man, it was that he'd allegedly been the one on the bottom, a stain on his honor his rivals never let anyone forget. To keep these norms in line, they had a law called the Lex Scantinia. Now its exact purpose is murky and debated by scholars, as it's very poorly documented. It seems to have been aimed at protecting freeborn boys from sexual assault and possibly prosecuting citizens who took the passive role. But it wasn't a blanket ban on same-sex acts. More often than not, it was just another weapon used to harass political opponents. Nowhere do you see these twisted dynamics more clearly than with the emperors. Their love lives give us the whole spectrum, from what looks like real affection to just shocking displays of power. Let's start with one of history's most famous imperial couples, Emperor Hadrian and Antinous. Hadrian met Antinous, a handsome Greek boy from a humble background, while on a tour of the provinces. Antinous became Hadrian's beloved companion and traveled the empire with him. On the surface, this relationship followed all the rules: older, powerful men, younger men of lower status. But there's evidence suggesting this was more than just a powerful man and his boy toy. When Antinous tragically drowned in the Nile River at around age 20, Hadrian's grief was off the charts. He declared his lost lover a god, an incredible honor. He founded a city, Antinopolis, where Antinous died, and started a cult in his name that spread across the empire. More statues of Antinous have survived than of almost any other figure from antiquity, which tells you just how deep Hadrian's feelings ran. While still a relationship framed by power, their story hints at a genuine emotional bond that pushed against rigid social rules. But other emperors twisted these rules into a terrifying public show. Enter Nero, whose name is basically a synonym for scandal. Nero had two well-known marriages to men. First was with a freedman named Pythagoras, where Nero, unbelievably, played the role of the bride. But his most infamous relationship was with a young boy named Sporus. Ancient historians say Sporus looked eerily like Nero's dead wife, Poppaea, who Nero was rumored to have killed. So, in an act of grief or madness, Nero had Sporus castrated, dressed him in the empress's clothes, and married him in a public ceremony. Nero called Sporus his empress and paraded him through the streets. This wasn't love, it was a horrifying display of absolute power. By castrating Sporus, Nero physically and permanently forced him into a passive, feminine role. By marrying him, Nero was showing he was so powerful he could bend reality itself, spitting on every Roman idea of manhood and decency. The story of Sporus is a tragedy, a dark reminder that in Rome, a person's body could become a prop in an emperor's twisted psychological drama. So what about life outside the palace? For the average Roman man, the rules were just as strict, if not stricter. In the Roman military, discipline was everything. While relationships between soldiers of equal rank were heavily discouraged because they could undermine unit cohesion, a soldier was free to find partners outside the army, as long as he stuck to the usual rules about status. For the millions of enslaved people across the empire, life was far more dangerous. A slave had no legal right to their own body. Their masters could use them sexually, male or female, without any consequence. This wasn't a relationship, it was an owner using his property. While a few inscriptions hinted affection, the official view was pure exploitation. So was there any room for love between equals? For most of Roman history, a relationship between two freeborn men of the same status was socially and politically radioactive. It would have meant one of them had to take the shamed, passive role, risking his reputation. Because of this, any such relationships are largely hidden from the historical record. That doesn't mean loving mutual partnerships didn't exist, but they would have stayed deep in the shadows, far from a society that saw power and penetration as the same thing. This system, based on power and status, defined the Roman world for centuries. But a massive cultural shift was on the horizon. As the empire grew older, philosophers, especially the Stoics, began to push the idea that sex was only for making babies within marriage. The biggest change, though, came with the rise of Christianity. With a new religious view that saw any sex act not for procreation as a sin, the old rules started to collapse. By the 4th century CE, Christian emperors started passing laws against same-sex acts, now calling them contrary to nature. In 390 CE, Emperor Theodosius outlawed passive same-sex acts for citizens, with punishments that could be as severe as being burned alive. The era of conditional acceptance was over. What was once a question of power had become a question of sin, driving these relationships completely underground and paving the way for centuries of persecution in the Western world. So, that image of ancient Rome as a gay paradise? It's a misunderstanding. The Roman acceptance of men loving men was never about tolerance as we know it. It was a reflection of a brutal, patriarchal culture where desire was just another way to show who was in charge. A Roman man could sleep with another man, but only if he was the conqueror and his partner was the conquered. The story of Hadrian and Antinous suggests that real affection could still blossom in this harsh world, while the tragedy of Nero and Sporus shows its most monstrous side. But for most Roman men, love and desire were a minefield of unwritten rules, where one wrong step meant disgrace. Looking at this world shows us that our ideas about love and identity aren't universal. The Roman experience reveals a totally different operating system for sexuality, one built not on orientation, but on a power hierarchy that touched every part of life. It's a powerful reminder that the way we see the world isn't the only way it's ever been seen. If you found this trip into the world of ancient desire fascinating, Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. And let us know in the comments, does learning about the Roman rules of power change how you see their society? Thanks for watching.